Welcome to today's deep dive. We are going to be looking at something really incredible today. So I want you to picture this. It's November 1962.
Right.
You're high in the Himalayas, and you have 10,000 Indian troops sitting inside, like the ultimate geographical
I
fortress.
mean, literally the highest ground you could ask for.
Exactly. They're at 13,000 feet. They have completely unobstructed sight lines, dedicated drop zones for air supply, and, they're sitting on enough stockpiled rations and ammo to comfortably wait out the impending winter.
By every conventional metric of military science, they are completely untouchable.
Untouchable. And yet, within just a matter of days, this totally impregnable mountain fortress completely disintegrates, like from the inside out.
Yeah, it's wild. The collapse is so absolute that the entire defensive system shatters without the enemy even having to really breach the main gates.
Which is just insane. How does a perfect defense engineer its own destruction?
Well, that is exactly the operational mystery we are unpacking for you today.
Ugh.
We are looking at a literal masterclass in systemic failure.
Yeah, specifically a chapter of military history concerning the Kameng sector of the Northeast Frontier Agency, the Sela and Bomdila debacle.
Right. And we are going to step out of the standard, chronological retelling today. We're going to step into the shoes of operational analysts.
I love that approach, but to really pull this apart, we need a baseline, right? The source material establishes this foundational military formula that I want you to keep running in the background of your mind as we go through this.
It's super important.
It is. The formula is good terrain plus prepared forces plus clear command equals a successful defense.
Basically a three-legged stool.
Exactly. And today we're going to examine the catastrophic physics of what happens when you just kick that third leg clear command right out from under the other two.
Yeah, it's not pretty. So we have to start by analyzing the board itself, because following an initial setback at Tawang, the Indian Army needed a new line to hold.
Right, they had to fall back.
Yeah. So they chose a mountain pass called Sila. And if we run this through our operational framework, starting with that terrain advantage, Sila wasn't just good ground, it was, structurally dominant.
Dominant how?
Well, it sat squarely upon the centuries-old bridle trade route, and it controlled the singular motorable road connecting Tawang to Tezpur down in the plains.
Oh, wow. So it's the ultimate geographical choke point.
Exactly. If the Chinese forces wanted to move heavy equipment or artillery or, large formations southward, they had no choice. They had to push through Sila.
And they'd be doing it while fighting the staggering elevation gradient, because the text emphasizes these steep, unforgiving slopes providing phenomenal fields of fire.
Right. And since we're analyzing this at an advanced level, we really have to consider the atmospheric physics of fighting at 13,000 feet.
It's not just regular combat.
No, not at all. You aren't just firing down, you are firing through thinner air. The whole trajectory of standard small arms and artillery changes.
That's fascinating.
The defender, sitting up top, has this almost godlike advantage over an exhausted enemy who is slogging upward through oxygen-deprived freezing air.
While carrying their own gear.
Exactly. So the terrain is actively fighting alongside the defender.
But then you also have the logistical geometry of the pass itself, right? Because mountain warfare is entirely dictated by supply lines.
100%.
Yeah.
If a mountain road is cut, your army starves.
Right. But Sasala had these extensive, naturally flat dropping zones right at the top of the pass. They had clear run-ins for transport aircraft, so the garrison could literally be sustained indefinitely from the sky.
And we can't forget the water situation.
Oh, right. The source flags two freshwater lakes situated just west of the pass, sitting right inside the defensive perimeter.
People always forget that at high altitude, dehydration kills troops almost as fast as bullets do.
Really?
Yeah. Because if you don't have liquid water, you have to melt snow. And melting snow for 10,000 men requires a colossal amount of fuel.
Like kerosene and wood, which you'd have to haul all the way up the mountain.
Exactly. So having a natural water reservoir right there just completely eliminates a massive logistical vulnerability.
Okay, so we've established that Sela is the absolute tactical anchor. It has the elevation, the sight lines, the air supply, the water, plus multiple delaying positions forward at a place called Jang, where you can bleed the enemy before they even see the main fortress.
Right, it's perfect.
Yeah.
But this is where the strategic logic takes a really severe left turn.
Uh-oh.
Because the division did not just fortify Salah, they took their available forces and they split them.
They split them up.
Yeah, they sent a significant portion way down the road to a town called Bomdila.
Okay, I read this deployment strategy and I immediately bumped against the logic of it. Because if you have the ultimate fortress at Salah, why on earth would you dilute your combat power to hold a lesser position?
Right, it doesn't make tactical sense.
Especially since the source note's Bon Dila was drastically weaker defensively, it didn't have the same dominating heights or the geographical chokehold.
No, it lacked tactical supremacy completely. But it possessed something far more dangerous to military decision-making.
Yeah.
Political gravity.
Of course. Optics.
Yeah. Bomdila was the district headquarters. It was an administrative center with a name that politicians down in the capital actually recognized on a map.
Wow. We see this tension throughout military history, don't we? The friction between tactical reality and political optics.
All the time.
It's the equivalent of choosing to defend a valley just because the mayor's office is there, instead of using the impregnable ridgeline 2 miles away.
Yes. The political optics demand you defend the name on the map, even if the terrain guarantees you will lose the army defending it.
That's such a critical lesson. Military value must guide deployment over political visibility.
Now, Bomdila did have some logistical convenience. Being closer to the Assam Plains meant shorter supply lines from the rear.
Sure.
But by committing to hold both Sila and Bomdila, the High Command created an immediate operational nightmare.
Because they aren't just defending 2 isolated points anymore.
Exactly. They are now obligated to protect the sprawling, twisting 60 miles of vulnerable mountain road connecting them.
60 miles! That's insane. So let's look at the original plan. Because before the execution fell apart, the theoretical framework, the Harbaksh-Singh-Pallet plan, actually had this brutal, elegant logic to it.
It really did. It was built on the fortress defense concept.
Right.
The architecture of the plan was totally sound. You treat Sila as the primary strong point, like the tip of the spear that absorbs the main Chinese thrust.
And Bon Dila is the depth position, the backup fortress.
Exactly. And the critical element of this doctrine was that both garrisons were to be stockpiled with 15 to 20 days of intense combat supplies.
So they were ready for a siege, and the most brilliant part of the doctrine, I thought, was the psychological preparation.
Yes.
The commanders accepted that the Chinese, being masters of infiltration, would probably maneuver through the jungles and cut the road between Selah and Bomdila. But the Indian forces were explicitly instructed not to panic.
Right. If the road is cut, you don't break out. You stay inside your castle walls.
You rely entirely on those airdrops. You let the environment do the heavy lifting.
Because the strategic objective wasn't to march to Beijing. It was simply to run out the clock.
Which is so smart.
Yeah, if the Indian army could delay the Chinese advance for just a few weeks, the deep Himalayan winter would arrive. Heavy snows would block the northern passes stretching back into Tibet.
And the Chinese supply lines, which were already dangerously long, would just snap under the weight of the winter.
Exactly. The Chinese forces would freeze and starve, allowing the Indian army to counterattack in the spring.
It's the classic Russian defense against Napoleon, transposed to the Himalayas. You use the winter as your ultimate operational reserve.
It is a brilliant concept. But there's always a but.
Right. A brilliant concept on paper is useless if the deployment contradicts it. And the forced deployment analysis here reveals a staggering execution gap.
Let's get into the troops. We are talking about the 4th Infantry Division here, which is a massive footprint of human beings. We have the 62 Brigade with 7 battalions up at Salah. We have the 48 Brigade with 3 battalions down at Bomdila.
Okay, so there's our 2 castles.
Yes. And then comes the fatal administrative decision. Major General A.S. Bathania, who is the newly appointed division commander, requests permission to establish his divisional headquarters in a place called Durangdong.
And General B.M. Call, the corps commander, actually approves it.
He does.
Okay, wait. I need to challenge the rationale here, because putting the headquarters at Durangdong sounds like pure idiocy in hindsight.
Oh, it was.
But at the time, what was General Pathania's actual justification? There had to be some internal logic to wanting to sit in the middle of your 2 forces. I can't imagine a commander actively choosing to trap his own command structure.
Well, the justification usually stems from this misguided desire for centralized control. Durangdong was geographically in the middle, sitting in a valley.
Okay.
So a commander looking at a flat map thinks, well, if I am in the middle, my communication lines to the front and the rear are equidistant. I can control the entire 60-mile battle space.
A flat map.
Right. Furthermore, valleys are comfortable, they are warmer, they have existing infrastructure for a sprawling headquarters staff, and they sit right on the main road.
Sure, they're comfortable, but by placing the division headquarters in a valley right between the 2 fortresses, they essentially put their central nervous system outside their ribcage.
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
Salah and Bondila were the armor, but the brain was just sitting out in the open at the bottom of a bowl, completely exposed to the elements. They basically abandoned the entire premise of the two castles doctrine.
And the cascading effect of this deployment is terrifying. Because Pathania didn't just bring his staff.
Oh no, what else did he bring?
He brought the 65 Brigade, 2 whole infantry battalions, just to protect his headquarters.
So now the 4th Division isn't two self-sustaining fortresses anymore.
No, it is a fragile, 60-mile-long chain. Because the brain is in the valley, survival now dictates that you absolutely must keep the road open to supply and communicate with the headquarters.
Which, in the dense mountainous jungles of Nefa, securing 60 miles of road against light infantry infiltration is basically a mathematical impossibility.
Exactly. Because the brain was trapped in the valley, the Chinese operational commanders didn't even need to lay siege to the heavily fortified castles. They just had to sever that 60-mile spinal cord.
Which brings us to the Chinese operational design. And the sheer scale of your preparation here is staggering.
It really is. While the Indian command structure was awkwardly stringing itself out and arguing over headquarters placements, the Chinese were physically re-engineering the landscape.
They literally pushed a road from their forward base at Leh all the way to Tawang.
Yeah. They concentrated 3 full divisions: Force 419, the 11th Infantry Division, and the 55th Infantry Division. They established an immense logistical tail to support rapid, decisive action.
And their operational approach is a masterclass in maneuver warfare. The text identifies this multi-axis attack doctrine, which brought us down into a brutal 3-step sequence. Fix the front, turn the flank, and cut the rear.
Let's analyze the mechanics of this, starting with the fix. The 55th Division was tasked with the frontal assault along the main Tawang-Salah axis.
Right into the teeth of the fortress.
Exactly. But the objective here is not necessarily to break the fortress immediately. The objective is noise, pressure, and psychological captivity.
So it's a distraction.
Essentially, yes. You assault the prepared defenses just enough to convince the enemy commanders that the main blow is falling exactly where they expected it.
So the Indian forces at Salah become fixed in place, their attention locked completely forward.
Right. They're hypnotized by the frontal assault. And while they are staring down the barrel, the Chinese initiate step 2, turn the flank.
Which is Force 419.
Correct. Force 419 utilizes a narrow, punishing corridor to the west, navigating the treacherous ground between Salah and the Bhutanese border.
And the tactical reality of a turn maneuver in mountain terrain is that it weaponizes the very geography the defender thinks is impassable, right?
Yes, exactly. Force 419 bypassed the main fields of fire entirely, moving through blind spots in the topography to position themselves to strike Salah from the side and rear, unhinging the linear defense.
Wow. And then comes the knockout blow. Step 3, cut the rear. And the execution of this step by the Chinese 11th Infantry Division is easily the most mind-bending detail in the entire source.
It is unbelievable. They executed a deep, wide outflanking move from the east. To do this, the 11th Division marched 160 kilometers over 6 days and 7 nights along something called the Bailey Trail.
I mean, we have to pause and consider the physiological toll of this march. The Bailey Trail was, in many stretches, nothing more than a shepherd's goat track tracing the contours of the Himalayas.
Right, and they moved an entire division on a strictly man-pack basis. No vehicles, no pack mules.
That is just crazy. Every individual soldier was carrying roughly 30 kilograms, over 65 pounds of weapons, ammunition, and survival rations on their back.
And you're hauling half your body weight through freezing, oxygen-starved altitudes of 14,000 to 15,000 feet.
And doing it mostly at night to avoid detection by Indian aerial reconnaissance. The tactical discipline required to move over 10,000 men through the dark in freezing temperatures without breaking noise discipline or losing unit cohesion is phenomenal.
It's unparalleled. And they were augmented by approximately 1,000 local porters, which speaks to their immense logistical foresight. By the night of November 17th, the 11th Division just materialized from the mountains like ghosts.
And they seized a vital bridge spanning the river right between Durangzong and Bomdila.
Yes, they sliced the road perfectly in half.
Let's look at the operational result of that 160-kilometer march. By cutting that specific bridge, the Chinese 11th Division isolated the exposed nervous system. Headquarters 4th Infantry Division at Durangzong is now cut off from Bomdila to the south, and Silla to the north is cut off from the headquarters.
It is a complete encirclement.
And the source draws a really brilliant historical parallel here that highlights the tragedy of ignoring history. It compares this Chinese envelopment to the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir during the Korean War in 1950.
A little over a decade prior, the Chinese utilized the exact same doctrine against the U.S., deep infiltration through Frazen Mountains, to cut the single road behind the U.S. 1st Marine Division, isolating them in the high ground.
But the U.S. Marines didn't disintegrate. The text notes a drastically different outcome, and we need to explain how they survived because it highlights exactly what the Indian Command failed to do.
Right. The Marines at Chosin utilized massive, coordinated, close air support and overlapping artillery fire to maintain a protective bubble over their forces.
They executed a cohesive fighting withdrawal, practically destroying the Chinese IX Army group in the process.
Because the Marines maintained unit cohesion, their command structure remained violently engaged.
Yes. The text makes a damning observation here. If the Indian High Command had bothered to study the Chinese operational methodology from the Korean War, they would have anticipated the fix, turn, cut sequence.
They would have known the Bailey Trail, no matter how rugged, was a viable avenue of approach for light infantry. But they failed to study their enemy's history.
Which accelerates us into the most tragic aspect of this deep dive. The text states that the battle was lost even before it was fought.
It's true.
They had the ultimate defensive terrain. They had the stockpiled rations and ammunition. They hadn't even engaged in a decisive firefight yet. And yet the division completely mentally disintegrated. How does a well-stocked modern military force just evaporate?
Well, we have to analyze the command uncertainty that plagued the operation. It was a systemic loss of confidence at 3 distinct levels of leadership.
Let's start at the top. The Corps commander, General B.M. Call.
Right. The source makes it clear his appointment was political, driven by patronage from Prime Minister Nehru and Defense Minister Krishna Aman.
So his combat resume at that echelon was completely empty.
Entirely empty. He had no experience commanding a division in battle, let alone a corps. And worse, he had just been thoroughly traumatized by a devastating defeat at Nam Kachu weeks earlier.
So you have a Corps commander who is already psychologically shattered before the Chinese even begin their main assault.
Exactly. You couple Call's paralysis with the man above him, the Army commander, General L.P. Sen.
And where is General Sen during all this?
Sitting in Lucknow, hundreds of miles away in the sweltering plains of Uttar Pradesh.
You're kidding.
No. He displayed absolutely no inclination to establish a tactical field headquarters closer to the front. He was managing a high-altitude dynamic maneuver battle by pointing at flat pieces of paper on a desk.
Managing a Himalayan defense off a flat map is like trying to diagnose a complex heart condition by looking at a child's drawing of a chest. You have no concept of the gradient, the weather, the friction of movement.
It's absurd. And Sen made it worse by actively purging the generals who actually did understand the terrain.
He fired them.
Yeah. He removed General Umrao Singh, and disastrously, he removed General Naranjan Prasad from command of the 4th Division on the literal eve of the battle.
Wow. And Naranjan Prasad had walked the ground, right? He understood the defensive geometry of Selah.
He did. But when you fire the operational experts who push back against your map-based fantasies and replace them with politically connected, inexperienced loyalists, you guarantee disaster.
Okay, so you have a toxic trio, Sen in Lucknow, looking at a map, Call paralyzed by previous trauma, and Division Commander Pathania trapped in the valley at Durangzong, completely panicking because the Chinese just cut the road behind him.
A perfect storm of incompetence.
Let's look at the communications on November 17th. The Chinese have sprung the trap. What do the generals do?
It is a study in conflicting assessments and the total abdication of responsibility. The Director of Military Operations, the DMO, who understood the tactical strength of the position, urges them to hold firm. Saleh is impregnable.
Right.
But Pathania, hyperventilating in the valley, is begging for permission to withdraw. Call is utterly indecisive, refusing to give a clear order. General Sen recommends withdrawal, and the Chief of Army Staff remains non-committal.
It's a game of hot potato with the lives of 10,000 men. Nobody wants their signature on the order that loses the division.
They finally issue a signal to withdraw. But the DMO intercepts this information and has the signal stopped.
So there's a counter order.
Yeah. Then a new set of instructions is generated, layered with so many caveats it basically becomes meaningless.
What did it say?
They essentially tell the commanders on the ground to hold on but withdraw if necessary, while simultaneously ordering them to clear the roadblock, but also prepare to be completely cut off.
That isn't an order. That is an anthology of contradictory suggestions.
It's useless.
And this forces us to examine the critical mechanics of falling back. What is the actual difference between an organized withdrawal and a disorganized retreat? Because they sound similar to a layman, but operationally they are universes apart.
Oh, they are completely different. An organized withdrawal is arguably the most complex and dangerous tactical maneuver a military force can execute.
Really? Why is that?
Because you are stepping backward while under extreme pressure. It requires meticulous planning. Units must leapfrog backward in designated phases. One element lays down overwhelming suppressive fire, while another moves to pre-planned, prepared alternative positions. You maintain a continuous, interlocking wall of steel between you and the enemy.
Okay. And a disorganized retreat.
A disorganized retreat is a rout. The command structure evaporates, and the objective shifts from delay the enemy to save yourself.
And we see exactly how this transition occurs at Silai.
We do. Under the confusing cloud of those contradictory orders, the 62 Brigade commander decided to pull a single battalion back from a forward position to protect a withdrawal route.
But the geometry of the terrain meant that to pull back, this battalion had to walk right through the prepared defensive lines of the other battalions.
Exactly as the Chinese were launching their probing attacks.
Oh my God. Put yourself in the boots of an Indian infantryman at Selah at that moment. You are sitting in a freezing bunker. You've been told you are in an impregnable fortress. Suddenly, you see hundreds of your own comrades running backward past your position.
It's the ultimate psychological shatterpoint. Mental defeat precedes battlefield defeat.
Right. The troops see the withdrawal. They see the Chinese immediately surging forward to occupy the freshly vacated forward bunkers, turning those weapons downward onto the remaining Indian positions.
So they assume a general retreat has been ordered, and they have been left behind. The panic goes completely viral.
And by the morning of November 18th, the 62 Brigade, the massive force supposed to bleed the Chinese all winter, completely broke. They abandoned the ultimate defensive terrain without fighting a coordinated battle.
The fortress collapsed from a loss of will, not a loss of structural integrity.
And once Selah fractures, the cascade effect sweeps down the valley. The Chinese have turned the flank, Selah is in chaos, and the enemy is flooding toward Durangzong.
Which brings us to the fall of Durang. And here we see one of the most staggering derelictions of duty in modern military history.
Let's talk about Pathania. He is sitting at Durangzorong with the 65 Brigade. He has roughly 3,000 armed men under his immediate command.
Right. And the Chinese 11th Division is mostly focused on the roadblock. Only small probing parties have managed to get into the vicinity of the headquarters, opening up with light, small arms fire.
3,000 infantrymen against light probing fire. You don't even need heavy artillery for that. You just need to form a perimeter and push them back.
A competent commander would have swatted them away like flies. But Pathania's nerve had completely failed.
So what does he do?
Instead of organizing a perimeter defense, he abandons his post. He orders a full retreat, fleeing the battlefield and heading for the Assam Plains, leaving the remnants of his forces leaderless in the valley.
The brain didn't just step outside the ribcage. It severed its own spine and ran away. But the tragedy compounds. Because we move down to the fall of Bomdila, the final depth position, and here we see General Call, who has been paralyzed this entire time, suddenly decide to aggressively micromanage a tactical firefight from hundreds of miles away.
It is the ultimate operational own goal. Down at Bomdila, you have the 48th Brigade, commanded by Brigadier Gurbakh Singh.
And they are actually fighting, right?
Yes. They're currently locked in heavy combat, actively repulsing a Chinese frontal assault on their prepared positions. The defenses are holding. And then the radio crackles.
It's General Call.
It's Call.
Yeah.
And he issues a direct order for Gurbakh Singh to strip troops out of his active defensive line and send a mobile relief column up the road to rescue Durangzong.
The same Durangzong that General Pathania had already abandoned. Call is ordering a rescue mission for a ghost town, and he's doing it by cannibalizing an active defense.
The force dilution is fatal. Gurbakh Singh violently protests the order. He reports that his brigade is already operating at half strength, 6 companies instead of 12.
And he is actively taking fire. Pulling troops out of the bunkers now will create massive gaps that the Chinese will instantly exploit.
And Cole just overrides the commander on the ground. He forces the issue.
Unbelievable.
Gurbakh Singh has no choice but to comply with a direct order from the corps commander. In the middle of the firefight, he pulls 2 infantry companies, 2 tanks, and 2 mountain guns out of the fortress and points them up the road.
And what is the immediate operational result of this forced dilution?
Absolute disaster. No sooner does the mobile column leave the protective perimeter of Bon La than they drive straight into a massive Chinese ambush perfectly concealed in the wooded slopes flanking the road.
The column is shattered.
They attempt to fall back into the fortress, but the Chinese infantry has already surged forward, flowing like water into the exact bunkers the relief column had just vacated.
Call didn't just order a bad maneuver. He effectively unlocked the front door and handed the keys to the Chinese vanguard.
Precisely. By 0300 hours on November 19th, Bon La collapses. The 48th Brigade loses all cohesion. They attempt desperate fighting withdrawals, falling back to Rupa and then to Chaku, but they are continually outflanked and overrun by a highly mobile, deeply infiltrated enemy.
The brigade fragments and surrenders. The 4th Infantry Division has been basically annihilated.
It is a systemic failure of breathtaking proportions.
But within this macro collapse amidst the generals fleeing and the contradictory orders, the source material actually pauses to highlight an extraordinary pocket of micro-leadership.
Yes, the story of the 4 Rajput.
We really need to spend time on the 4 Rajput and Lieutenant Colonel Brahmananda Vasti because it serves as the ultimate case study in what command is actually supposed to look like when the sky is falling.
It is a profoundly moving study in professional competence against the backdrop of systemic cowardice. To understand Avasti's final stand, we first must understand the chaotic conditions of their deployment.
The journey of the 4 Ardutira to the front lines sounds less like a military deployment and more like a desperate scramble. They were stationed all the way down in Belgium in southern India.
Right.
They are rushed via train through Pune and Baroni, finally arriving at the railhead in Missimari in Assam on October 23rd. And from there, the logistics completely evaporate.
There is no organized transport. The men are commandeering whatever random one-ton trucks they can find. The bulk of the battalion is forced to physically march 30 kilometers up the punishing mountain gradients just to reach the Durang Valley.
They arrive exhausted, unacclimatized, and lacking essential heavy equipment.
And instead of keeping the battalion together to form a cohesive fighting bloc, the Panic Division headquarters treats them like spare parts.
Which is typical of piecemeal deployment, a symptom of a desperate command. The HQ strips away one of Avasti's companies purely to act as a personal bodyguard for the headquarters staff.
Yeah, and the remaining companies are scattered across disparate ridges, completely fracturing the battalion's organic unity.
Enter Lieutenant Colonel Avasti. The text points out he was an exceptionally brilliant instructor from the infantry school. He arrives at the front to find his battalion fragmented, his men exhausted, and the entire sector teetering on the edge of panic.
How does an instructor handle that reality? By falling back on the bedrock of military professionalism. He does not succumb to the hysteria.
He immediately begins reestablishing the fundamentals. He sends calm, precise, handwritten notes to his isolated company commanders, detailing the exact geometric sighting of machine guns and artillery arcs.
He hyper-focuses on the logistics of ammunition and rations, knowing that supply is the lifeblood of morale. He projects a localized field of calm.
And then the system completely collapses. It's November 18th. The 62 Brigade has broken at Sela and is streaming backward in a disorganized route. Avasti's scattered elements are ordered to fall back.
But we have to look at his decision-making in the crucible of this moment. He realizes that if he simply turns and runs, the thousands of men retreating from Sela will be slaughtered by pursuing Chinese forces.
So what does he do?
Avasti gathers a tiny element, 7 officers and remnants of 3 scattered companies, and makes a conscious decision to stand his ground. He takes up a position holding a critical bridge, intent on serving as the rear guard to cover the withdrawal of the 62 Brigade.
He is holding a bridge for an army that, completely unknown to him, has already shattered into the jungle.
Exactly. They hold the position, fighting off probing attacks and waiting for a brigade that will never arrive.
Finally, realizing the horrific truth of their isolation, Avasti orders a withdrawal toward Lubrang, and the conditions of this withdrawal are harrowing.
They are hauling their wounded through the freezing high-altitude terrain.
And Avasti himself, the commanding officer, is physically carrying a regimental doctor who had gone snowblind from the glare of the Himalayan ice.
That image is just seared into my brain. While the division commander is sprinting for the safety of the planes, a battalion commander is carrying a blinded doctor on his back through the snow.
It is the absolute distillation of taking responsibility for your men. Avasti's swelling party of stragglers eventually reaches a fork in the mountain track. They make the fateful decision to take the route leading past an ancient monastery known as La Gialagompa.
And the geography around La Gialagompa basically seals their fate. The text describes the approach to the monastery as a plateau.
In mountain warfare, a flat, open plateau surrounded by high ridges is nothing more than a topographical killing field.
Right. And the Chinese operational speed meant they had already outpaced the retreating Indians. A force of approximately 500 Chinese infantry had maneuvered into blocking positions on the high ground surrounding La Gialagompa.
As Abbas's exhausted, encumbered column walked onto the plateau, the ambush was triggered. Overwhelming, withering automatic fire poured down from the ridges.
In that specific situation, you are caught in the open, heavily outnumbered, taking fire from elevated concealed positions, and you're carrying wounded men. Human instinct screams at you to scatter.
You drop the gear and run for the tree line. How does Abbasi react?
A highly trained infantry instructor knows that freezing or running in a kill zone guarantees death. Avasti did not retreat.
What did he do?
Despite lacking any heavy artillery or mortar support, he immediately ordered a two-pronged frontal counterattack directly into the teeth of the Chinese ambush on the high ground.
He takes a battered remnant force and attacks a numerically superior enemy holding the high ground. The sheer kinetic shock of that decision must have been staggering.
It fundamentally disrupted the Chinese calculus. They expected a slaughter, but they received a ferocious, highly coordinated assault. The fighting degenerated into brutal, close-quarters combat.
Hand-to-hand combat.
Yes. The Chinese, taking unexpectedly heavy casualties, maneuvered aggressively to isolate Avasti and his officer cadre. The men of the 4 Rajput rallied tightly around their commander, fighting hand-to-hand with bayonets and entrenching tools.
But the mathematics of the ambush were just insurmountable.
The final resistance was total. The 4 Rajput took 100% casualties. Over 200 Indian soldiers were killed or grievously wounded on that plateau. Colonel Avasti, along with his fellow officers, died fighting alongside their men to the very last.
The source includes a detail about the aftermath that really elevates this from a tactical textbook to a profound human tragedy.
The shepherd boy.
Yes. A local shepherd boy who would miraculously survive and later become the head lama of La Gialagompa watched the entire battle unfold from a hiding place. After the battle, he witnessed the Chinese troops digging a massive trench.
And what he saw them use as a marker is heartbreaking.
He saw them take a flattened metal ration tin and scratch the names of the fallen Indian officers into it as a crude marker for the mass grave. And months later, when the snows melted and the Indian army returned to retrieve the bodies, they found a blood-soaked letter folded inside Colonel Avasti's uniform.
It was a letter he had been writing to his wife.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast to the generals fleeing in the rear.
The leadership study of Colonel Avasti provides the vital counterweight to the systemic failure of the high command. It proves that even when the macro system of supply, communication, and higher leadership completely disintegrates, micro-leadership, professional competence, physical courage, and leading by example still dictates how men will fight and die.
Avasti and his men fought with terrifying resolve to protect a system that had already abandoned them.
Exactly.
So we zoom back out from that plateau. The 4th Infantry Division is gone. Silla, Durang, Bondila have all fallen. Over 5,100 Indian casualties. The entire Kemeng sector has been erased. The Chinese 11th Division is standing at the foothills, essentially looking down at the flat expanse of the Assam Plains.
What is the strategic reaction in the rest of India?
We enter the phase of the defense of Assam, which is characterized by absolute bureaucratic meltdown.
The military is desperately trying to engineer a strategic recovery. They are scraping together the remnants of forces, trying to rush the 5th Division and the 23rd Division into the theater to form a desperate defensive line along the massive Brahmaputra River.
But while the military is trying to form a line, the civilian government is pressing the self-destruct button.
The Home Ministry, operating in a total vacuum of panic and completely failing to coordinate with the Defense Ministry, secretly begins issuing orders to civil officials in Assam.
They mandate the immediate evacuation of the city of Tezpur, creating mass civilian hysteria. And far more damaging, they order the implementation of a scorched earth policy.
The state was preparing to immolate its own critical infrastructure.
They ordered engineers to prepare the Digboy oil fields, a massive strategic energy asset, for total destruction. They prepared to blow up the power plants supplying the Brahmaputra Valley.
Because the assumption was that the Chinese were going to pour into the plains and annex Assam, and the government wanted to deny them the industrial spoils.
But the invasion of the plains never happened. The Chinese vanguard stopped at the foothills. Why didn't they push forward and take Assam when the door was wide open?
Because of the inescapable gravity of logistics, the Chinese had executed a flawless operational maneuver. But in doing so, they had stretched their own supply lines to the absolute breaking point.
You can sustain light infantry moving through the mountains for a week on man-pack rations. You cannot sustain a mechanized army occupying the vast plains of Assam from supply bases located hundreds of miles away in Tibet.
Especially with the Himalayan winter closing the passes behind you, their operational reach had exceeded their logistical grasp.
They proved their point. They utterly humiliated the Indian military apparatus, effectively securing their territorial claims in the Ladakh region on the opposite side of the country by using NIFA as a violent distraction.
And having achieved their geopolitical objectives, on November 20th and 21st, Beijing declared a unilateral ceasefire. The Chinese forces simply turned around and methodically marched back behind their claimed lines, leaving the Indian military shattered in their wake.
The war ended not with a climactic final stand at the river, but with the enemy deciding the lesson had been taught.
It is a staggering sequence of events.
We promised the listener at the beginning that we would extract the core mechanics of this failure. If we synthesize everything we've discussed, the terrain, the split deployment, the Chinese maneuver, the command paralysis, it feels like we need to do a quick rapid-fire review, like a flashcard review based on the answer writing framework from the source.
Let's do it.
Number 1. Why did Silla collapse?
Ultimately, the loss of will at the command level, leading to a disorganized withdrawal through their own lines, heavily exacerbated by the initial splitting of forces.
Right. 2. What was the Chinese operational approach?
Fix, turn, cut. Extreme mobility through seemingly impassable terrain, immense logistical preparation like using man-packs, and striking the deep rear to induce panic.
3. Leadership lessons from Lagala Gompa.
Professionalism in chaos, leading from the front, and maintaining unit cohesion even when the macro system completely fails you.
And finally, 4. The central question answered. Why did a strong defensive system collapse despite favorable terrain and available forces?
It collapses when clear command is removed from the equation. Terrain and troops simply cannot compensate for generals who plan off maps and issue contradictory orders under panic.
Which circles back to the sheer perfection of Selah. The ultimate lesson of the Kameng sector is that static perfection breeds operational laziness.
The high command looked at the 13,000-foot ridges, the plunging fields of fire, and the drop zones of Selah, and they believed the terrain would do the fighting for them.
They fell in love with their own fortress. They believed that because Selah was physically impregnable, it was strategically unassailable.
But a perfectly fortified position is completely useless if the enemy simply decides not to attack it frontally. The Chinese understood that you don't use a hammer against a steel vault if you can simply walk around the back and cut the power cord.
Right. The Indian command's reliance on the physical strength of Selah blinded them to the fluid reality of maneuver warfare. They failed to plan for depth, they failed to secure their command nodes, and when the illusion of their invincibility was shattered by the Chinese appearing in their rear, their morale evaporated instantly.
The physical cables of the suspension bridge never snapped. The mountain didn't crumble, the weapons didn't jam.
The structure failed because the invisible cable's trust in leadership, clarity of communication, and psychological resilience were violently severed. They ignored the historical precedents of the chosen reservoir. They fired the men who knew the terrain. They managed the war from a desk in Lucknow and a valley in Darang.
It forces us to ask a really critical question, not just of military history, but of any organizational structure. When you look at your own strategic landscape, what impregnable fortresses are you relying on?
Are you trusting in a system simply because it looks indestructible on paper?
Exactly. And more importantly, is that system being managed by leaders who have intimately walked the difficult freezing terrain? Or is it being controlled by people pointing at a map from the comfort of a safe distance? Because as the ghosts of Selah prove, when the brain is disconnected from the body, the armor means absolutely nothing.
A chilling and vital perspective to close on. We really hope this deep dive has given you a new framework for analyzing structural and command failures far beyond just the battlefield. Thank you so much for joining us.